Hey guys, Mo Trapper. I wanted to talk about, and I got a comment in the video about the alpha trap that I did just a week ago or so, and because I mentioned that trap that is a dogless trap, and a guy commented and said, "Okay, it's dogless. What makes it dogless, and what makes it not catch dogs?" And that's not what that means. So. If you're really new to trapping, it's kind of confusing, right? Because that makes sense. It's a dogless trap, so it won't catch dogs, right? But that's not what they mean when they say that. They're actually talking about a part of the trap, um, and that is this part right here. So this part is called the dog, and it would go over the top of this back jaw as you set the trap and hold that back jaw down, and then it interfaces with the pan, right? And when you push the pan down, it lets that dog go, which allows the trap to close. So that's a dogless trap. A dog-proof trap is one that won't catch dogs, and those look like this, right? So it's a whole different style of trapping. These are for raccoons. You can catch possums and foxes and other stuff in them too, but they're primarily a raccoon trap. And this is a dog-proof trap, which means they're designed so they won't catch dogs. So that's the difference, and that's definitely confusing. But that's what we're talking about. So when we talk about a dogless trap, we're talking about a part of the coil spring trap. They will absolutely catch dogs and coyotes and everything else. And this is a dog-proof trap, which is designed to not catch dogs, right? So when we say dogless, we mean something else. So when we say dog-proof, right, this is a dog-proof trap, a raccoon trap. Primarily, you can catch other things with them as well, but they're really made to go after raccoons. The dog-proof trap is a trap that is designed so that it won't catch dogs, okay? Dogless is another whole nother thing. And really what that's referring to is this is a dog. This part right here is called a dog on a coil spring trap, okay? So this would come over the back jaw, or some people call it the power jaw, right? The loose jaw is up in the front. This would go over that jaw and then engage with the pan, right? And that's how the trap would be set. This is a Duke 650 Pro. Same thing, that's a dog. So this is a round dog. This is a flat stock dog, right? So there's differences between dogs. Here's that coyote cuff, another round dog, right? And this one has a night latch in it. This one has a night latch in it as well. This one does not, okay? And we'll talk about that too. But those are dog traps, or dog-on traps is what people would call these. These over here are all dogless traps, okay? So this is a Montgomery, and this hook on the back of the pan actually hooks onto the jaw. So there is no dog that comes over the top of the jaw. This hooks onto the jaw of the trap. This is a Bridger number 2 dogless. This little notch you can see right here, it actually locks onto the jaw, right? So nothing comes over the top of that jaw. The alpha you guys saw, similar to the Bridger number 2, it's got that little tab there, locks onto the top of the jaw. A little bit different is the No BS Extreme Juniors. So instead of locking onto the jaw, it's got the same tab, right? Similar tab, but the No BS Extreme Juniors have this piece of steel welded on the jaw, and that's what the notch interfaces with instead of the jaw itself, which allows that pan to sit lower within the jaw spread, and that's a really nice feature of those traps. And then this is an MB650, and it's a whole different thing. Like, it's dogless in that nothing goes over the jaw, but both jaws are held down. You can see this lever that I'm moving here. That piece in the front and this piece here in the back, my finger on it, those hold the jaws down on these tabs that are on both the front and back jaw. And this piece here, and there's a night latch on it, interfaces with the pan. So this trap's kind of its own thing. It's pretty different than any of the other ones, and we'll go over it in detail and talk about the differences. But that's kind of the overview, and that's what we mean when we say dog. When we're talking about a coil spring trap, dog or dogless. This would be a dog trap. This would be a dogless trap. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about dog traps or dog on traps, right? So this is a very basic one. This is a Duke number 3. I've used this to catch beavers. I've caught, I don't know, a half a dozen or more beavers in this trap over the years. I've got several of them. They work great for that. There are some folks who use these to trap coyotes. You know, and I've seen some guys that put up some pretty big numbers that use traps like this, either the Duke number 2s, the Duke number 3s. So I can't argue with it. I don't really like them that much. They work okay for beaver trapping. They're a little small to get a back foot catch on a beaver, but I have caught some beavers in them, and I've made some front foot catches with beavers in them, and they held just fine. But anyway, this is what they mean when they say the dog, right? So this piece of flat stock on this particular Duke, it's flat stock. When you set this trap, we can do that real quick so you can see fully what I'm talking about here. So when you set this trap, you're going to pull that pan up, right? And it's going to interface the dog right here with the pan itself, okay? It goes over that back power jaw. This is called the loose jaw. This would be the power jaw. That's just how people refer to them. But that is what holds the trap open essentially, right? And then I push the pan down and the dog lets go, right? Allows that power jaw to close, bringing the loose jaw up with it by the levers, and that's how you catch the critter, right? So that's what we mean by a dog trap, okay? A lot of these Dukes use a flat stock, and it's pretty thick. It's pretty, you know, it's solid metal. So you might think, you know, okay, so I get them set, right? You have to adjust this nut here to get your pan tension, so how hard it is to depress that pan to set the trap off. And there's a little bit of wiggle room. You know, you can bring that pan down. I had it up real high when it was set just a second ago, but you can bring it down to get it lower, right, to get less pan travel, and you can make a pretty light pan tension with them. But what happens with these traps is, again, it's pretty thick metal, but if you catch a coyote in this trap, I promise you, if you caught a half a dozen coyotes in this trap, I promise you, over the course of 6, this dog's going to get bent. It's probably going to get bent with just one, but there is almost no way you could go 6 in a row without having this dog get bent. They bite them, they slam them around. They're just really hard on these traps once you make a catch. And when that happens, when this dog gets bent, it's going to shorten, right? Because it's shorter, the angle of it is going to change. So when you go to set it, there could be times when you set it and you can't even make the trap go off because you push the pan all the way down and the dog is still engaged, right? So, you know, then you have to come up with a way to get the thing to go off, which is a pain. And then you have to bend this back, flatten it back out. And like I said, when these traps start to get beat up, when you start to make catches, these dogs are going to bend. They just are. And that means, kind of like I said in some other videos, you know, you're going to have extra traps that are already, you know, set up and tweaked, and you know, you've done all your homework on them, gotten your pan tension the way you want them and everything, so that you can pull this trap out of the ground and put a fresh trap in there, so you can take this one back home and, you know, get it on your vise and hammer it, you know, to flatten everything back out, and then maybe shorten it with a file and whatever you got to do to get it to where it sets right again, right? So that's a little bit of a pain. The other thing about these traps, so they're not base plated. So when we talk about base plating, and you'll hear that about when people talk about traps, you're about, is it base plated, right? So this is again a standard Duke #3 coil spring, and it is not base plated. So there's basically a cross in the middle of all coil spring traps, right? Coyote traps, coil spring traps. So they're always going to have a cross, right? So you're going to have a horizontal member and a vertical member. And this one you can see in the horizontal member, they've just punched up parts of the steel to put the spring pin through, right? So this is your spring pin. This pin right here that runs around and holds the springs in place, right? So your spring pin is held to the frame by those pieces of metal that they punched up, right? And then of course that holds your levers on as well. So when a trap is built like this, it typically is swiveled on the side. So this is a side swiveled trap rather than a center swiveled trap, right? When we talk about the Coyote cuff, this trap is base plated, right? So there's actually 2 layers of steel here. There's your frame, so this is the trap frame here, and then below that they've welded a second piece of steel on there. That's what they say, that's what they're talking about when they say base plated. This trap is base plated, so it's got basically another structural piece below the actual frame of the trap that reinforces that trap to keep it from getting bent, because these traps can get bent because there's just not a whole lot of steel down there on that trap frame. It's also center swiveled, right? So that trap was swiveled over here off to the side. This one's swiveled in the center. And one of the things that base plating usually allows you to do is to put the swivel of the trap in the center of the trap, which is better for holding because then you're not pulling the animal to one side. Sometimes animals they have a little bit of a leverage advantage. They can get out of a trap a little bit easier, I think, if it's side swiveled rather than center swiveled. So that covers that. When you move up in traps, a lot of times I think the best dog on traps on the market have a round dog. So that flat dog on the Duke, it's much easier to bend it if you just apply force to the center of it. It's going to bend much easier than something that's round. So these rod dogs or round dogs are much, much, much stronger. You're much less likely to have to do anything to them after you make catches. And I've got some MB 550s. I've got some Duke 550s. This is a Duke 650, just as an example. But I've got, a dozen catches on a couple of them, and the dogs are just fine. I never have to adjust them. They're much stronger. And that's a real weak point on the dogs, on the traps that have a flat dog. It's a real weak point of the trap. But so there's a round dog, right? So that's a little bit different than the Duke. And then this is again that Coyote cuff, and it also uses a round dog, right? And there's night latches on these round dogs. That's a whole nother thing. There's no night latch on that Duke. But essentially a night latch is a notch cut into the dog. Or on the dogless traps, it's cut into the notch that kind of forms the dog. Where if you go above it, the trap is set, but it's totally safe. The pan's usually pretty high. You bring the pan down slowly until you hear it click, so it falls into that second notch. It's almost like a gun trigger, like a sear. So it comes down, falls into that sear or that night latch. You can hear it, so you don't have to be able to see it. You can just close your eyes, or if you're in the dark, you can just bring that pan down slowly and you'll hear it click. Then you know that trap is right there ready to go. So it's ready to fire, but it's got the pan tension that you want set in it, because you set it, you're going to set your pan tension based on the night latch, not above the night latch, right? So let me set this Duke 650 and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so you can see that this pan is high, right? Really high. But as I bring this down, hear that click? So now it's in the night latch. So now I know, with no visual cue, I didn't need any visual cue, as long as I was quiet as I was bringing it down, I could hear it click. Now I know this one's ready to go, right? And then from there, as soon as it hits the pan tension I got it set at, the trap's gonna fire. So that is, let's see, we talked about dogs, we talked about night latches, we talked about base plating, we talked about center swiveling. So Those are kind of the big things that I wanted to talk about with these traps. Now I'm going to bring up some of the dogless traps and we'll go over the differences between the dog traps and the dogless traps. Okay, so now we're talking about the dogless traps. And this is a Montgomery No. 4. So this is very similar to the Duke in that it's not base plated, right? It's side swiveled. It looks almost exactly like the Duke, but the difference is instead of having a dog that comes over that power jaw, this notch right here is actually going to hook onto that power jaw, and then as you depress the pan, it's going to fire, right? So let me set it. And this one's a little bit cantankerous usually. These No. 4s can be, so I'm going to put the gloves on so I don't get pinched real bad. And there you go. So you can see there that that notch is actually hooked over that rear jaw. You know, same in the front, the power jaw, or the loose jaw in the front, still loose. And as I depress that pan, the trap fires, right? So that's dogless, meaning that there's no dog that's over the top of the power jaw or the rear jaw to hold it down. It's held down by a different method. So there's no dog. So this is a Montgomery dogless, and this is one of the main styles of dogless where it has this kind of notch. It's built into the pan, and that's how that is dogless. This is a Bridger No. 2 dogless, and it has, if you can see that little notch right there that comes up off the pan, similar to the way that one works, but it just the whole pan system is just a little bit different from the way that works. I can set this one and show you. So you might have heard it drop into the night latch there. So it's just that notch is over the rear jaw, and as I push the pan down, it fires. This is a K9 Extreme Junior from No BS. This one is extremely similar to the Bridger No. 2 dogless. The only difference is you see this piece of metal that's welded right here. So this block is what engages with the pan, with that little notch on the pan. And what that does is it brings the pan down lower in the trap jaws. Ooh, these fork coils. Oh. So you can see there that the pan is actually sitting slightly below the jaws, and that's because we're in a notch that is lower than the outside portion of the jaw. Rather than hooking on the outside portion of the jaw, it's hooking on that block that's slightly below the jaw, right? Same thing. As I depress the pan, the trap fires. And then this is the Alpha that I showed you guys in that last video, and it works almost exactly like a Bridger No. 2 in the way that it engages the jaw. It actually has a notch here as well, more like the No BS, to kind of bring that pan overall down in the trap jaws. But that's what we mean when we say a dogless trap. Again, this is a dog-proof trap, and these are dogless traps. So just a different terminology, basically. And now I'll bring up the 650, the MB 650, and it works different than any of them. It's a pretty cool design, and I'll show you how that one works too. Okay, so this is an MB 650, and these things are so strong. The springs are way bigger than what's on a 550. It's 4 coiled, as you can see, so there's coils in the front and in the back. The pan system and everything works different. On these traps, the front jaw is not loose, so it's solid. It's actually held down by that lever you can see right there. Same in the back. There's a lever back here that's holding this jaw down, so both jaws are held down while they're set, which is really different than any of the other traps out there. I'm sure there are some others that are like this, but this is kind of the main one that works like this. It's got a big pan, it's got a big jaw spread, it's got wire levers instead of having solid levers like all the other traps you've seen today. I mean, I got to set it off camera because I got to get my knee on the front of it. You know, I got to set it on the ground. I can't set it up here on the bench. I mean, they're very, very strong traps. But because this jaw is held down, you know, you got to reach up under to set them off. But you'll see they're very powerful traps. So the way this one works is different than any of the other ones. So it has a lever here. So this lever, this kind of elbow, this bent piece here, and this elbow here are going to hook onto these notches that are welded onto, or actually cast in this case, or cast onto the jaws, both front and back. So that lever's over to hold the jaws down, and then this engages with the pan to set the trap. And obviously the pan comes down and lets those jaws go. So very powerful traps, very good traps. For me, I think they're a little bit overkill personally, but I know a lot of guys that run these and really, really like them. You know, sometimes you can get some digging at your trap, and if they dig and hit that loose jaw, that can kind of bump the trap, and then that kind of scares them and they move out. You wouldn't have that happen with these. They're pretty expensive, but I think they're fine traps. I just, you know, I prefer MB 550s, Duke 550s, and those No BS K9 Extreme Juniors. I really like those traps too. One thing I will say after all this is I would not recommend at all to anyone to end up with a hodgepodge of traps like I have. You know, I do these trap comparison videos, these, you know, new traps. I kind of buy them as I can and do a video about them, just because I'm, for whatever reason, super curious about traps, the way they work. Whenever a new one comes out, or even some of the older ones that I'm not familiar with, I always want to buy one and just kind of see how it works. And that's how I've come across most of these. So Duke 550s I own a couple dozen, MB 550s I own a couple dozen, Bridge number 2 Dogless I own a couple dozen. Everything else that you see, it's like onesie twosies that I just kind of picked up to see what I thought about them, right? And I don't think that's a good way to do it, because like when I get out on the line and I've got, say I've got 2 dozen MB 550s, and actually I can add on to that, I could do 2 dozen more Duke 550s, because they're almost identical. The trap bed that you have to dig is the same size. They work the same, they set the same, you know, they bed the same. I'm going to use the same type of pan covers, whether I'm using a Duke 550 or an MB 550. So you can just really get into a rhythm, right? You're digging the same size trap bed, the trap goes in the same way you think it should every time. You know, you can just really get into a rhythm whenever you have the same trap, or 2 very similar, I mean basically identical traps, right, that you can just go out and set all the time. And you'll get really good at digging trap beds. You'll get really good at the depth and the length and width, and, you know, the overall size of it, the shape of it. You get really good. If you have a hodgepodge, for example, you know, I have to dig a much bigger trap bed for my No BS K9 Extreme Juniors than I would for my MB 550s. Same with the Bridge number 2 Dogless. Now, just like the Duke 550s and the MB 550s, for the Bridger number 2 Dogless that I have and the No BS K9 Extreme Juniors that I have, their trap bed is almost identical. The pan cover system that I use for those 2 is exactly the same. So I've really only got 2 different kind of systems that I'm doing. But whenever you get into a rhythm and you're rolling, and then you grab another dozen and it's the other, and you go, oh man, now I gotta, you know, kind of adjust my trap bed, and then I gotta use a different pan cover, and I just gotta remember how this all works. So it slows me down. I know it does. It's silly. I should get rid of all of everything else and just buy one trap. But I, you know, accumulated them over the years, and it's just kind of how it goes. And I think a lot of guys are probably in that same boat. But if you can start from scratch, like if you don't have any traps right now, I don't really think it matters all that much. I mean, I got a video called The Great Trap Debate. There's a lot of debate about traps. I think if you went with Duke 550s, MB 550s, No BS K9 Extreme, juniors or the regulars, the Duke 650s, MB 650s, Bridger number 2 Dogless, you know, the Alpha traps. If you went with any of those and just said, I'm just going to buy that trap, and you got yourself, you know, whatever you think you're going to use, 4 dozen, 5 dozen, 6 dozen of those traps, figured out your system for bedding, figured out your system for staking, figured out your system for pan covers and trap covering, you know, year 3, year 4, year 5 of your trapping, you're going to be so much more efficient by that point than somebody who hodgepodged them all together and is using 4 or 5 different. And you're going to get to, I think you're going to get to the ideal trap cover, you're going to get to the ideal pan cover, you're going to get to the ideal staking system much faster, because you're only dealing with one trap, and you're not messing yourself up by thinking, you know, yeah, that'll work with this trap, but it won't work with this trap over here. So that's what I did for many years in the beginning, and I think it slowed me down overall a little bit probably. But it is what it is. So if you're like me and you like to just see how stuff works and you like to buy things that just check them out, then have at it. You know, you could have, you know, 2 or 3 dozen traps, and none of them are the same, right? Like you could literally go that far. But I think really just picking a trap, and again, I don't think that it matters all that much. What's going to matter more is that you are bedding them solidly, that you're covering them well, that you're using some system to keep dirt from getting under the pan, that you're keeping them from freezing, right? That's a big problem, at least in my area, so that they're working, right? You got to keep them working through rain and snow and freeze and thaw and all that kind of stuff. You're using good baits and lures, and you're getting more traps in the ground. That's going to help you more than anything you can do, in all honesty. So, but anyway, you guys seem to like these trap comparison videos, so I figured I'd do another one. I've got a wire lever No BS K9 Extreme Junior coming, so as soon as I get that, I'll do a video on it too. And I think that's it for now. Thanks for watching. All right, and I just wanted to end this one with this. So I've done videos on this before, but these traps are not dangerous to the animals. They're not breaking legs. They're not, you know, ripping paws and things off of critters. They're fast and they're loud, right, when they go off, when there's nothing in the trap, which makes them a little bit scary, a little bit intimidating, but they're really not that big a deal. Okay, so I mean, it grabs you. Don't get me wrong. It grabs the heck out of you, but that's really all it does. Is it just grabs you. And I had some guys talk about do it barehanded, right? And I know there are some trappers out there that do this barehanded. Good for them. My argument is coyotes are wearing a fur coat all the time, and I'm not. You know, I don't want to get cut or, you know, just any injuries that I don't need, right? From doing this kind of thing, which is kind of silly to begin with. But it is good to show people that, you know, my fingers still work, right? Like, it's okay. It's not a big deal. But, you know, these are thin gloves. They're not, you know, some crazy thick wool parka gloves or anything like that. So I do it with gloves on. It's just for a little bit of protection. Like I said, coyote's wearing a fur coat. So this is my fur coat, you know, over my bare skin to kind of simulate that. So, but anyway, that's it, guys. Thanks.